about your boy?
Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, I have 2 kids, and my first child was vaccinated without a problem.
Absolutely fine. So what did you think of vaccines?
I was completely on board, and in fact, my sister's child had a febrile seizure after the MMR and major gut issues after the MMR, and that's kind of what started her journey of researching vaccines. And she started to try and talk to me, about some of her concerns about the safety of vaccines, and honestly, I just was not interested in listening at all because, I thought, I mean, the doctors know better. They're the experts, right?
But isn't it so your sister, and you can see what happened. I'm not judging you at all but this is how much we're so brainwashed.
Yes, absolutely. I know. I feel really bad now. I feel horrible because, over the years, she kept trying to give us some information, and sometimes things became a little bit tense, at family gatherings because she wanted to talk about this issue and nobody else wanted to talk about it. And I feel really bad now because I realize how lonely, that must have been. But, nothing had ever happened to my child, and I was completely on board with, what the medical profession says is best for kids.
And what did they say to you? Can you remember?
I don't know that I ever had a conversation about vaccines. It was just what you did, right? You took your kids in and you got them vaccinated. So I took my second child, and he got...
So he was born okay?
He was born perfect, yes.
And he's developing... when did he have his first vaccines?
Pretty much at birth, the Hep B. So, and then 2.5 weeks later, he was at Children's Hospital here in San Diego, hospitalized with a high fever, and he turned out he had a urinary tract infection, which my sister then mentioned. She said that she'd heard some people had possibly had that reaction before after a Hep B vaccine, but honestly, I haven't been able to find any scientific evidence to back that up, so I'm willing to chalk that up to coincidence. But I didn't vaccinate him again because I did start listening to my sister, at least in the sense that he shouldn't be vaccinated if he was sick, and that we should try and space them out a little bit. So
you took that bit on board?
I took that bit of advice, yeah. And so when my son was 5.5 months old, he had already missed the 2-month and the 4-month vaccinations because he'd been sick at the time. And he had a little bit of a dry cough, but, they said it was perfectly safe to vaccinate him. And, he was already behind schedule, so, they were a little bit concerned about that. And so they wanted to give him every vaccine that he was missing up until that point. And I said I didn't feel comfortable with that, and that I wanted to just pick the 3 most important. Now, again, up until that point, I had done no research of my own. So I let them pick. I said, it was just sort of arbitrary. Pick 3, the ones that you think are the most important. So that's what they did, and DTaP was one of those.
Do you remember?
So, I'm feeling I should have been more prepared because I know this, but I'm just blanking out right now,
That's
what
okay.
the other 2 are.
Do you know what?
HIB was one of them.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember what the 3rd one was right now. But anyway, within 24 hours, he was having these weird episodes where he would stare off into space, and I couldn't really get his attention. He just wouldn't focus at all, and his lips, around this area, started to turn blue and gray. But it was winter, and we had relatives visiting, so we were outside at parks a lot when this was happening. And honestly, I'd never seen something like that before, and I thought he was just cold, And so I would turn away to get him some more clothing or get him a blanket, and then I would turn back, and all of a sudden he was fine again. His coloring was back. And I was sleep deprived too. He was not sleeping through the night. So, I didn't know what to make of it, but it didn't seem, to be, I never would have pictured it was a seizure. I didn't know that. I didn't know that seizures could look like that. But 2.5 days later, after this started, he completely collapsed. He was in my arms. I was changing him, and he just fell over. He was 5.5 months old, and he collapsed like a rag doll. 5.5 months old.
And
yeah.
Just,
completely collapsed, just in my arms. Just doubled over and lost all muscle tone. And he stopped breathing. So yeah, thank God my husband was home that day. That was extremely unusual. Thank God he was in my arms and not in his crib alone. He was rushed to Children's Hospital by ambulance. And when he first got there, they said, "What's this kid doing here?" They'd been told, that this major emergency was on the way, and he looked perfectly fine, had all his coloring, was smiling and happy, his usual bubbly self. And but they kept him for observation, and a couple hours later, he had another episode. And so then he was hooked up to an EEG machine, and he had another seizure, and that's what the neurologist that we were then seeing, was telling me, that's what this is. These are seizures.
Did you tell them that he'd recently been vaccinated?
Well, I didn't bring it up, but my sister was there in the hospital, and she brought it up and said...
I love your sister.
Yes, I know, she's great. She said, could this be related to the vaccination he just got the other day? And of course the neurologist said, it's highly unlikely, And she kept pushing it a little bit, and I was still, I said, shh, he's the neurologist. He knows what he's talking about, right? So he gets the EEG, and, they can see the seizure activity in his brain. He had an MRI, he had all these other tests. He crashed at one point, like a code blue. Again, they almost lost him. And so then he got moved to the pediatric intensive unit. And that's where he stayed, for another couple days. So we were there for a total of about 4 days. Got out right before Christmas. After that, I took him to his pediatrician. I said, could this be related to his recent vaccination? And she said, it's a coincidence. And I was like, okay, it's a coincidence, huh? I don't know. My sister was telling me other stuff, she was starting to give me more information. And she told me that this really needs to be reported to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, to VAERS. And so I asked his pediatrician and I asked neurologists if they were going to report, and they said, no, you can, I didn't know at the time that it was the law. His event was, one of those events that they're required by law to report it to VAERS, but they didn't. Nobody did. So I ended up reporting it to VAERS, and in the process of, reporting it to VAERS, I started kind of looking around VAERS and seeing that there were some other kids who'd had the exact same kind of, episodes, the blue-gray around the mouth, losing all muscle tone and, not being able to respond. And that's kind of what started my journey into going, maybe this isn't a coincidence. Maybe there's actually something to what my sister's been saying. Maybe this really is related to the vaccine. So we stopped vaccinating him for a while. And I did actually give him another vaccine. I gave him the polio vaccine, and I even gave him the flu vaccine, which kills me now.
When did you give him the flu? When?
It was about a year later. I waited, quite a while before giving him any more vaccines. But
no more.
Yeah, well, that was the end after that. But because he had stopped his seizures for a while, he'd been on medication since that first episode. He'd been on phenobarbital, and we weaned him off of it. And then eventually the seizures started happening again, and he had to go back on medication. So.
And today he's how old?
He's 8.5 now.
And how's he doing?
Well, he has a diagnosis of epilepsy. He takes medication twice a day, to prevent breakthrough seizures, although occasionally they happen, We have a pretty good handle on it, knowing what the triggers are, but the medication helps. And he also, has an IEP, as many kids who've had adverse reactions to vaccines do, and he gets some special education help, because he's got, his brain didn't get enough oxygen when he was a baby. That blue-gray was because it's reduced oxygen. That's part of that reaction that happens with the DTP and the DTaP, So, yeah, there's definitely, and there's some other permanent effects, but I don't know that I should really talk about it on camera, because,
Sure.
But it's definitely affected his life, that's for sure.
So, how are we going to help the people that were like you? I was stubborn and I just thought it was ridiculous. Well, my friend tried to warn me, but what is it going to take for all our kids to be damaged before we get it? What would your advice be to the mother listening now that says, I don't believe you, I'm sorry, I'm going to go and take my doctor knows best?
Yeah, that's really hard to say because, it seems to be like most of us find out the hard way. We don't get it until something happens to our child, right? But, definitely, I did not do any research. I completely trusted the medical profession. I turned this decision over to them. Yeah, so my advice is just, do your own research. Do not turn that decision over to somebody else. And maybe you'll come to the same conclusion as the medical profession and say, I think this is safe and move forward, But maybe you won't. But you have to do your own research. And you know, if you read the vaccine information statements, what happened to my son is listed right on there. I don't think I even ever read those papers, you know, that they give you in the doctor's office, because, like I said, I just trusted the doctor. Whatever they said, that's what I was going to do.